Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. Towards the end of the 17th century, England had a society based on large land ownership. During this period, lands and properties were often passed down through inheritance within families, but such claims and disputes over property sovereignty were common. In a small village in England, a family sought to defend its claim to a much larger piece of land in court. The family believed that these lands had been passed down to them through inheritance for several generations. The property in question was of great importance both materially and symbolically. Over time, various disputes over the inheritance of these lands led to complex legal battles. The legal system of the time was not as efficient as it is today. Resolving issues in court could take a long time, and bureaucratic procedures could last for a quarter of a century. The justice system often condemned parties to long waiting periods in their pursuit of justice. The family's claim was related to a land dispute, and this case quickly became known throughout the surrounding villages. Considering the size of the property and the family's reputation, the court initially suggested a quick resolution to the case, but achieving justice would not be so simple. There were complex property rights, old inheritance contracts, and various disputes based on them. Moreover, these lands were not only claimed by the family, but other individuals in the past had also asserted their rights to the area. As the family sought to defend their inheritance, they tried to present documents and evidence to support their claim. However, the legal system of the time had difficulties verifying the authenticity of written documents, and oral statements and testimonies were fraught with uncertainty. The lack of a deed or any official record to define the rights to the property made the process even more complicated. This uncertainty led to the case dragging on for years. Initially, the case was filed by a single individual, but as more family members joined in, the lawsuit grew. With each new generation, members claimed that they too had rights to the land and became part of the ongoing legal battle. What initially seemed like a case that would last a few years turned into a tradition due to bureaucratic obstacles and slow-moving processes. This case also reflected the social structure of the time. Land ownership was not just a financial matter, but also an issue of prestige and social status. The family's ownership of this land had a significant impact on their relationships with other families in the village. Therefore, the case became not only about the rightful ownership of the property, but also a struggle to maintain and strengthen the family's social position. Each generation chose the legal route to defend the family's power and prestige, laying the foundations for a legal process that would last for generations. In the end, this case, which began in the 17th century, became an important example in the historical record, reflecting the weaknesses of the legal system of the time and the societal dynamics related to land ownership and inheritance. What began as a simple property dispute eventually turned into a family saga and an event that stood out in England's long legal history. After the lawsuit was filed, the legal process quickly became complex within a few years. What started as a simple land dispute evolved into a series of intertwined legal issues and uncertainties. The family's case became connected to major legal matters such as inheritance, property rights, deeds, and contracts. Initially aimed at resolving only a part of the dispute, the process quickly grew and shifted in different directions. The primary issue was the difficulty the family faced in proving their rights to the property. In the 17th century, especially in rural areas and among peasants, official property records were often missing or inadequate. Archives were sometimes lost or poorly maintained, creating a significant obstacle to resolving the case from the very beginning. Family members tried to support their claims using old documents, testimonies, and sometimes oral statements. However, the lack of documents and the reliability of testimonies were the main factors that prolonged the case. Over time, the lawsuit begins to attract the attention of many individuals from every generation of the family, not just a single person. Initially, the person who filed the case and their family cannot survive for long, and the case is passed on to new generations. However, each generation enters the lawsuit with different perspectives and strategies. Family members gradually become involved, asserting that they too have a right to the property. The changing legal knowledge and strategies between the families, different generations lead to continued uncertainty in the case. While younger generations sometimes take a more aggressive stance, the older generation typically defends the legal traditions of the past. These conflicting strategies make the resolution of the case even more difficult. The change in heirs is another significant issue. After the death of family members, the rights to the property begin to be distributed among different individuals. Inconsistencies between inheritance contracts, wills, and testaments increase legal uncertainty in this process. The ongoing question of who the true owner of the property is remains a constant topic of debate in court. These conflicts between heirs do not just turn into a battle to determine the true owner of the property. They also lead to the involvement of outsiders seeking rights to the land. Thus, the case becomes not only about the family's internal issues, but also a war between various individuals and families claiming rights to the property. The family tries every legal avenue to avoid losing the property. However, the other challenges they face during the legal process cannot be ignored. The legal procedures of the time were quite slow. Court dates were frequently postponed, documents were lost, or could not be gathered. This made every stage of the case more complicated. The lengthy legal processes, along with the social, economic, and political changes experienced by those who opened the case and those who took it over, influenced their views on property rights over the years. Each new generation reevaluates the strategies used by the previous generations, and this reassessment leads to new evidence and justifications for the case. Each individual involved in the case believes they have rights to the property, so the case progresses in different directions. Transitions between courts, the loss of certain documents, and other legal obstacles cause each case to have different characteristics. Each time, the courts review the case file again, but due to the growing number of files and unresolved issues, every new session makes previous steps even more unclear. This results in the family and the courts having to put in more effort at each stage of the case. In conclusion, this legal process provides an important lesson not only for one family, but also for how the legal system of a period operated. Legal uncertainty, conflicting views between heirs, and bureaucratic barriers have made the case increasingly complicated. Over time, the family has been forced to continue this legal struggle, not for its own interests but merely as a part of the past. What initially began as a case filed by a single family member quickly turned into a legal battle that would last across generations. The first plaintiff's determination to defend the family's rights to the property eventually became a family tradition. Each new generation, taking over where the previous one left off, assumes the responsibility of defending their family's rights. This case grows to be more than just a property dispute. It becomes a fight for the preservation of the family's past, identity, and social status. The first generation initially filed a relatively simple case to claim rights to a property. However, over time, the case became much more complicated. Each new family member accepted the legal struggle as their responsibility and tried to do whatever it took for the case to progress. However, each new generation had to deal with the legal obstacles and shortcomings left by the past. On the one hand, the documents, written records, and testimonies left by previous plaintiffs were incomplete or insufficient. On the other hand, ambiguities in old inheritance documents made it difficult to form a definitive view of property ownership. Each new generation, while inheriting the legal legacy left by previous generations, also tries to adapt to the conditions and legal framework of their time. Over time, the claims to the property also shape themselves according to the social structure of the era. Therefore, each new generation reevaluates the problems that the previous generation could not resolve and develops legal strategies based on the conditions of their time. However, each generation becomes part of a cycle revolving around the same issue. It is nearly impossible to come to a definitive conclusion about when and to whom the rights to the property belong. The next generation not only takes over the case originally filed, but also adapts to the developments and changes in the legal system of the time. Over time, the scope of the case broadens and draws more people's attention. Along with other family members, neighbors, local landowners, and other interest groups become involved in the case. Each new generation not only defends the family's inheritance rights, but also tries to counter the objections of the opposing sides. This leads to the emergence of new legal battles at every stage of the case. When a generation takes over the case, the rights defended by the original plaintiffs, who are no longer alive, pass on to the next generations like a legacy. However, over time it becomes evident that this legacy has turned into a much larger burden. After the death of family members, a new heir emerges to take over the case. This transition leads to the case being approached from a different perspective each time. This is because each generation evaluates the case from various angles, according to the social, economic, and legal conditions of their era. Sometimes this means having more in-depth legal knowledge and experience, while other times it involves discovering new findings regarding old legal documents. Taking over the case can sometimes feel like a completely new beginning. Each generation analyzes the mistakes of the previous ones and develops more effective strategies. However, over time, this cycle depends on lost or misplaced documents, temporary solutions, and constantly delayed hearings. This entire process is in fact an effort by each generation to defend the continuity of a legacy and honor their identity. However, each time more uncertainty is added. This process can also be considered as a rebirth, because while each new generation revolves around the same case, they try to rebuild what the previous generation did, but from a new perspective. Legal issues are revisited each time, but each new generation shapes the process according to their own legal understanding. This situation leads the case to rapidly evolve into a form of family struggle. Family members continue the case not only to defend property rights but also to protect the legacy of their ancestors, family history, and their own future. Over time, this case becomes more than just a property dispute and turns into a striking example of how England's long legal history, inheritance, and property rights can become incredibly complex. This multi-generational legal struggle highlights how the pursuit of justice by families and society is shaped and demonstrates how slow and complicated the legal system could be. A case centered on property gradually becomes a symbol reflecting a family's history, identity, and social structure. Behind the 300-year duration of the case lies not only the complex claims to property and inheritance issues, but also the fundamental challenges in the workings of the legal system at the due time. From the 17th to the 19th century, England's legal system did not have the efficient and fast-working structure of modern systems. The slow pace of court proceedings and bureaucratic obstacles were among the key factors that led to the case lasting for generations. At the time, court procedures were not as sophisticated and quick as they are today. Legal processes largely relied on written documents and oral testimonies, but the accuracy and validity of these documents were often questioned, and sometimes they were lost. Courts' ability to maintain and process case files systematically was also largely lacking. These deficiencies caused delays in the legal process, especially when it came to documents related to property rights. The time required to resolve a case was not only due to the slow operations in the courts, but also to the bureaucratic obstacles of the period. In rural areas especially, the failure to maintain proper land records or inconsistencies in the records created significant challenges in delivering justice. Legal documents were often lost and were rarely archived correctly. Title deeds could be incomplete or erroneous, leading to confusion regarding property ownership. As a result, such issues were significant obstacles for judges in the courts. Additionally, the legal system of the time was quite complex. In England, land and property rights were often based on complicated contracts, inheritance agreements, and ancient laws. This presented a new obstacle at every stage of the case. For example, some contracts were written in old language, or language itself had changed over time, making it difficult to interpret the documents correctly. Similarly, very old documents related to inheritance were based on the legal rules and social structures of that time, making it hard to understand them by modern standards. The slow-moving legal system not only caused the case to take a long time, but also prevented the resolution of property rights. Although each new generation developed new strategies to overcome the legal barriers pointed out by previous generations, The obstacles they faced in each court process were different. This made it increasingly difficult for each generation to defend the family's rights to the property. Court proceedings were often delayed, and documents were re-examined, which led to unnecessary prolongation of the case. Furthermore, each new generation added more complexity to the case by re-examining old legal documents and listening to old witnesses. The contradictions between testimonies in court and old documents became a problem for each new generation. New generations, inheriting the case files from earlier generations, tried to resolve the documents. However, sometimes these old documents could not be understood correctly due to the language of the period, which led to further delays in the case. Judges had to spend more time trying to resolve the uncertainties in the old documents. Another factor that contributed to the prolonged case was the various claims and objections made regarding the property. While defending the family's rights to the property, other individuals occasionally started claiming rights to the property as well. Objections were usually based on old contracts, inheritance arrangements, and testimonies. These objections added a new layer to the case with each new generation. The uncertainty over who owned the rights to the property made the legal process much more complex. With new objections, long examination and evidence-gathering processes began in the courts. This made it nearly impossible to resolve the case. Lastly, the slow pace of the legal system at the time led to judges being more cautious and careful when making decisions. Judges became more hesitant in dealing with long-running cases, which led to unnecessary delays and extensions. Additionally, in the courts of that period, judges' decision-making processes were sometimes influenced by political, economic, and social pressures. This was another factor that prevented the case from reaching a resolution. At times, the courts avoided bringing the case to a conclusion by repeatedly delaying it. In conclusion, the 300-year duration of this legal process was due not only to the complex issue of property rights but also to serious challenges and obstacles in the workings of the legal system of the time. The slow-moving legal system, lost documents, unclear testimonies, and continually increasing objections caused the case to drag on unresolved for years. This situation stands as a striking example of how the shortcomings and slow pace of England's legal system sometimes prevented justice from being served and led to legal processes extending over many years. After 300 years of legal battles, the case finally reaches its expected outcome. However, the decision comes as an unexpected development for both the plaintiffs and society. After years of complicated bureaucratic obstacles and a multi-generational legal process, the court finds that the property in question has long since disappeared. The legal process spanning centuries has made it impossible to understand the true state of the property. The land that was being sued over has somehow been lost, destroyed, or otherwise ceased to exist. However, this could only be understood 300 years later, as the legal process continued. Initially, this case seemed like a struggle by a family to defend their rights to property, but over time, it turned into a legal battle shaped by the workings of England's legal system, social structures, and changing economic conditions. At first, the family's goal was simply to secure their rights to the property. However, as the years passed, the case became a sort of family heritage, with each new generation inheriting the fight of the previous one, not only defending old rights, but also trying to protect their own identity and social position. However, 300 years later, the court reveals the painful truths behind all the legal processes of an era. The investigation into the existence of the property reveals that, due to traces that had been lost or erased over time, the property had actually disappeared long ago. That is, when the legal process began, the state of the land may not have been uncertain in the early years, but over time, due to changes made to the land, natural disasters, economic crises, or other external factors, the property somehow vanished or ceased to exist. The land might have shifted, perhaps repurposed, or even disappeared due to larger construction projects. However, the families pursuing the case remained unaware of this change over the years. As the court reviewed the documents and testimonies, over the years it came to realize that the claims regarding the property's existence were largely based on historical and legal shortcomings. These legal challenges, however, could have been addressed over time as judges and legal experts worked meticulously with old documents and tried to piece together information from various sources to understand the situation. But ultimately, the court decided that the property no longer existed, that it had either been destroyed or lost. This decision, in fact, highlighted just how absurd the legal process had become, revealing the truth that had emerged after many years of struggle. A family's fight for rights spanning generations is fundamentally a search for justice, but the length of the legal process led it to lose its original purpose over time. Even though the property had been destroyed and lost years ago, the legal process lasted so long that the realization of this only came very late. By the time the court reached a conclusion, the case had merely continued on paper, with rights that had been lost and become uncertain over the years, rendering them no longer valid. The decision made at the end of the year demonstrates that this case could never have reached a true resolution, showing how compelling and humanly impactful the search for justice can be. In the end, the court declared the legal process invalid, as the property in question no longer physically existed. After years of struggle, the families had found nothing that they could claim as their own. Yet, throughout the case, each generation had defended their rights and believed that justice would eventually prevail. However, historical and legal mistakes, document deficiencies, and ultimately, the lost property led to the pointless continuation of this legal process. In the end, this case serves as a lesson that the law is not just about finding the correct solution, but also about how time, uncertainties, bureaucratic obstacles, and even changing societal structures can overshadow everything. A legal battle that spanned centuries ultimately ended with the shadows of a lost land and the disappearance of rights. The final outcome of the 300-year-long case was a significant turning point, not only for the families involved, but also for England's legal history. This prolonged legal battle not only reflected a family's effort to defend property rights, but also highlighted the complexities and transience of a legal system, social structures, and bureaucratic obstacles of a particular era. With its final decision, the court officially closed a historically lost case. This case remains an intriguing example of how law, justice, and time intersect in legal history. In the final years before closure, concerns and expectations surrounding the end of the case echoed throughout the legal circles of England. The conclusion of a 3-century-long property dispute signaled the end of an era. Now the significance of this case, from both a legal history and societal perspective, became more than just a legal process. It became an important lesson on how the past can be lost and how difficult it is to fully understand history. The decision at the end of the case ultimately reveals just how long and complex legal processes can be. Though this case was fought only on paper, each generation believed in justice and fought for it within their time. However, time, uncertainties, old documents, lost land records, and the slow pace of the court system prevented the case from ever reaching the right conclusion. In the end, when a legal decision was made, the property had already long disappeared and become irrelevant. This case demonstrates that the search for justice carries much deeper meanings than just defending rights to physical property. The 300-year-long legal battle not only symbolizes the human quest for justice, but also serves as a significant example of how the law has evolved from the past to the future. Each new generation has fought not only for the property but also to defend its own identity, family legacy, and social position, attempting to adapt to the changing conditions of the legal system. Over time, this case evolved from being merely a legal matter to occupying an important place in the intellectual evolution of society. Throughout the 300 years, the process unveiled how slow justice, old documents, and lost rights led to the discovery that a property that once held great importance and a central role had, in fact, disappeared. This is considered not only a legal loss but also a significant historical one. In legal circles, this case has been told for many years as an example. Even though it was eventually understood that the property no longer existed, the events throughout the process are recorded as an intriguing case demonstrating how long, complex, and uncertain the law can sometimes be. Moreover, this case serves as a powerful reminder of how time can influence legal processes and how at times, achieving justice may become impossible. The multi-century-long case has turned into a lost and forgotten case in England's legal history, now remembered only as a part of the past. In the end, understanding that the law is a long journey and that even profound and meaningful cases can fade away over time, this case remains as a historical note, a lesson. This centuries-long property dispute, beyond the search for justice, symbolizes the evolution of the law and its struggle against time. Although the case has ended, it will still be remembered and serve as an instructive story throughout history.